acompañan. Estamos tratando de arreglar algunos asuntos técnicos y vamos a comenzar en unos minutos. Vamos a proveer información acerca de cómo acceder a la interpretación.
Okay, Domingo, it is set.
Great. Thank you so much, Melina.
No problem.
And so I see some folks joining, so maybe we can give one more minute for others to join, and then we'll go ahead and start, and I'll provide the interpretation instructions. Vamos a dar unos minutos más para que se unan a la reunión más personas y daremos entonces las instrucciones para acceder a la interpretación. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Vamos a dar comienzo a la reunión. Thank you, everybody, for being with us this afternoon. Today, we will be talking about APCD's draft comprehensive monitoring plan. And I will go ahead and share instructions on how to access interpretation services. Muy buenas tardes a todos. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy en esta reunión acerca del borrador del plan integral de monitoreo de APCD. A continuación voy a dar instrucciones de cómo acceder a los servicios de interpretación. Voy a dar las instrucciones en inglés y después las repetiré en español. To access interpretation services, if you're joining us from your computer, please locate at the bottom of your screen the icon with that says interpretation. It has the form of a globe. Please click on that icon, and then you can choose English or Spanish. If you are an English speaker, you need to choose English, and then you should be able to access interpretation. If you are joining through tablet, iPad, or a smartphone, please locate the menu under the three dots, and please select language interpretation from there. You can choose English as your language of preference if you speak English, and you should be able to access the services. I am now going to repeat these instructions in Spanish. Para las personas que nos están acompañando y que hablan español, si se conectaron a través de su computadora, pueden localizar el icono con forma de globo terráqueo que dice Interpretation. Favor de hacer clic en ese icono y seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia. En este caso sería Spanish o español. Si nos están acompañando a través de su tableta, iPad o smartphone, pueden localizar el menú en su pantalla que está marcado con 3 puntos. Una vez que seleccionan esos 3 puntos, pueden seleccionar Language Interpretation o interpretación del lenguaje y entonces seleccionar el lenguaje de su elección. En este caso, si hablan español, sería español. All right, well, with that, my name is Domingo Vigil. I'm a Deputy Director at the San Diego County Air Pollution Control District, and I will I would like to introduce my colleague, Dr. David Soderman. Dr. Soderman is our Chief of Monitoring and Technical Services, and he will be providing the presentation today. So I will turn it over to you, David.
Thank you, Domingo. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Soderman, and I'm the Chief of the Monitoring and Technical Services Division at the San Diego Air Pollution Control District. Today, we're going to review the recent released draft Comprehensive Monitoring Plan. This plan has been released to document how APCD evaluates and determines where to place its ambient monitoring sites and equipment. Today's presentation will focus on two main ambient air monitoring networks. We refer to these as the regional network and our community network. For each network, we will present where the monitoring sites are currently located, what tools we use to evaluate the network, how pollutants are selected to be measured at new locations, and the outcome of that evaluation. We will also briefly discuss additional reports that APCD produces about its ambient networks. The Environmental Protection Agency, under the authority of the Clean Air Act, requires local air districts to monitor criteria pollutants and report their concentrations. EPA determines if the region meets the health-based standards for these criteria pollutants. The map shown here has been designated or been designed to determine if San Diego County meets those health-based standards, and this network's locations have not significantly changed their locations in the last several decades. EPA requires APCD to evaluate the regional ambient air monitoring network every 5 years. When evaluating this network, APCD considers several different evaluation tools to rank the monitors at the stations. The first tool that APCD looks at, we look at the purpose of each monitor at each location. For example, is the monitor required by a federal or state program? If so, is there a location requirement as well? Additionally, monitors at locations that measure highest concentrations in the region are ranked with a higher score or priority than locations that measure lower concentrations. The second tool we refer to as community type. Mixed use communities are ranked the highest since industrial pollutants have a greater impact on the residents in these communities. I should point out that a mixed use community is a community that has industrial sources as well as residential zones in close proximity. A primarily residential community are ranked the lowest since there is less pollutant impact, unless the station is located immediately downwind of a major pollution source, such as a freeway or power plant. And three, pollution shifts. Instruments that are located in communities in which the population is growing will receive a higher score than communities where the population is stable. Communities with decreasing populations will receive a lower score. Monitoring stations in communities with higher than county average rates of asthma, COPD, and heart-related issues will receive a higher ranking than monitoring stations in communities with lower than county average health-based rates. This is the reason why is that air pollution affects these types of lung and heart-related issues more than a healthy individual. EPA also has some assessment tools that we use, and there's 4 tools that they provide. This is the correlation tool, the removal bias tool, the exceedance probabilities, as well as the areas served. The correlation and removal bias tools evaluates the networks to determine which sites, if any, are redundant. Please note that just because a site is deemed redundant, it doesn't mean that the site is not providing valuable information about and to the community, and therefore may or may not be removed. The exceedance probability tool produces a map that displays the probability that an area will exceed the National Ambient Air Quality Standard. If APCD has no instruments or stations in the highest probability zones, this would indicate a monitoring gap in the network. Stations in the higher probability zones are ranked higher than stations located in the low exceedance probability zones. The area served assessment tool displays the square miles, total population, and the breakdown of ethnicities and age for each instrument. And by this, I mean of the population, and they do this for each instrument. Instruments that serve large populations would rank higher than instruments that only serve a lower population. Also, instruments that serve a disproportionate share of the county's population could indicate a monitoring gap. And lastly, APCD also considers how long the instrument has been collecting data at each location. The duration of historical data is useful to determine population or pollution trends, which is useful for assessing the effectiveness of air pollution reduction programs. Thus, long-term running sites are ranked higher than recently established sites. Also, if APCD recently, and by recently we mean within the last 5 years, invested in significant capital expenses at the monitoring location, this would lead to a higher ranking than sites that have not had that significant expenditures. And an example of this is replacing the shelter or the sampling deck, which is pretty costly. So those are the 6 tools that we use to evaluate the regional monitoring network. After we use those 6 tools, we sum up all the scores from the various tools and kind of rank them. And we then look at whether or not there is monitoring gaps. And so if a monitoring location is a gap, if a gap is identified through this program, that gap is usually indicated that there's an instrument that needs to be placed. And so this evaluation process typically identifies an instrument gap. So some examples of this is, sorry, let me start out. So a new monitoring station is typically set up to address an already identified gap or concern. And some examples of this is to address a gap identified through the EPA required assessment report. We can also identify a gap because we may be not having enough equipment compared to what EPA requires, the number of instruments that we have for a given pollutant. Or it might be that we identified a gap because EPA has required a new program and we haven't set one up yet. So 2 examples of needing to add a monitoring sites in response to a federally required monitoring programs. We call the Rancho, or our stations called the Rancho Camelo Drive, located along the 15 freeway. And this is for the EPA Near Road program that started up about 8 years ago, as well as the lead monitoring site at the McClellan Palomar Airport. And that was in response to a municipal airport lead program that EPA established back in 2012. Since monitoring stations are typically large and fairly costly to establish, APCD, if resources allow, will also evaluate whether additional equipment would be beneficial at the new location. For new EPA programs, there are typically a suggested but also not required list of additional equipment. APCD will also reach out to the community in which that new monitoring location is being located to hear their concerns, and will collaborate on the selection of additional air monitoring equipment, again, if resources are available. So this slide here, we're going to talk about evaluating, or I should say, the results of this evaluation, the most recent evaluation that we did on our regional ambient air network. And the result of that is that we should keep all our existing and planned sites. And so I forgot to mention a couple slides back that there were a couple sites on that map that were not operational, but we're planning on establishing. One of them is up in the Escondido area, and the second one is along the 5 freeway in San Isidro. But this evaluation results or process also identified 2 potential gaps. The first gap is in the Spring Valley kind of Rancho San Diego area. And this area has had little historical data, and our network assessment that we did a couple years ago suggested that we conduct a temporary study in this area to determine if a more permanent regional air monitoring network is needed. And the second gap is in the East Chula Vista area. Previous studies in this area have shown that the measured concentrations are equivalent to those observed at the monitoring sites in Otay Mesa. However, the population in the East Chula Vista has grown significantly over the years. In fact, this is one of the fastest growing areas in the county, and further testing is needed to determine if a potential permanent regional air monitoring site is needed. In this case, it's because of the huge population increase, and we're not sure if the concentrations that we measure in Otay Mesa are still representative of East Chula Vista. And APCD is actively seeking funding to purchase equipment to conduct that specialized temporary monitoring in these gap areas. And so that kind of concludes the regional network and how we evaluate the sites and the results of that sites. So the rest of today's presentation is going to focus on the community monitoring. So how does APCD decide which communities should have additional monitoring? Currently, we have 2 communities that are being funded through a state-funded program called the Community Air Protection Program. And this slide shows those communities outlined in red with the active monitoring sites in green and the planned sites in yellow. And these 2 sites we referred to as this community up here along the San Diego Bay is our Portside community, and this site down here along the international border as our international border community, which encompasses San Isidro and Otay Mesa. So how did we decide that these 2 communities should be the first communities in which we did enhanced monitoring or additional monitoring compared to other communities? One of the first tools that we used was called Cal Environmental Screen. This tool was developed by the state as a mapping tool that ranked census tracts by various environmental, health, and socioeconomical factors. Census tracts with a high score experiences a higher pollution burden than census tracts with a lower score. And more information about the Cal Environmental Screen can be found on the website or the link on the slide. So let's take a closer look at Cal Environmental Screen. So this is a typical output that you can see for a Cal Environmental Screen. This displays the whole San Diego County, which is the jurisdiction that the San Diego Air Pollution Control District has. So this score here is the overall score, the combined score between 21 individual indicators that are then kind of broken up into 2 different categories. The first category is the pollution burden, and the second category is the population characteristics. And so this, once you combine both of those scores, this is the map that you get. The communities and the census tracts that are in kind of the orange and the red have a higher pollution burden than the areas that are in green. And so this, one of the nice things about this map is that you can plot the rankings and the scores based on the overall score, which is shown here. You can also do it only looking at the pollution burden or the population characteristics, those 2 overall categories, or if you really wanted to dive down and look at the individual indicators, you can also do that as well. So the next tool is a map that is generated from the California Senate Bill 535. This bill is based on the actions introduced by the California Assembly Bill 32, which was called the Global Warming Solution Act of 2006. So AB 32, the Global Warming Solution Act, requires businesses to pay into a fund if they exceed their allotted emissions amount. And Senate Bill 535 requires that 25% of these funds be spent on projects that benefit disadvantaged communities. Now the question is what is a disadvantaged community? So AB 535 also defines and identifies what is a disadvantaged community. So according to SB 535, a disadvantaged community is a census tract that has an overall score in the top 25% in Cal Environmental Screen, which is the tool we just talked about in the previous two slides. It is also a census tract that has been previously identified by SB 535 as a disadvantaged community, or is a federally recognized tribal land. So more information on Senate Bill 535 and the disadvantaged communities can be found on the link on the screen. So let's take a look at the map that Senate Bill 535 produces, and they update this periodically. So this is the map again of San Diego County, and the areas that are in red are what Senate Bill 535 is classifying as a disadvantaged communities. You can see that a lot of the disadvantaged communities are along the San Diego Bay Area, communities along there, some in San Ysidro, and then all of the tribal lands out here. And then as well as there's some census tracts in El Cajon. So that's another tool that we use is these locations. The third tool that we use is very similar to the Cal Environmental Screen. This one's called the EJ Screen. This is an EPA tool that they developed. Again, it's a mapping and screening tool, very similar to Cal Environmental Screen. Again, it ranks census tracts based off environmental, health, and socioeconomical factors. This tool is a little bit different than Cal Environmental Screen, is that the EJ Screen is done nationally, not just based on the state. The EJ Screen also uses slightly different economic factor, or really their factors are a little bit different than Cal Environmental Screen. The EJ Screen does not produce an overall score, but you can also click through the different factors. And more information can be found at this website. So if we take a look at just one example, and I apologize for the lightness of the census tracts that are highlighted based on this tool. In this case, we're looking at these light purple areas. Before we talk about kind of the map, let's back up a little bit. So what is the EJ screening tool? You can display census tracts by individual parameters. These parameters include 12 population and source indicators, which are listed here. There are 12 here. You can also plot this by the 9 socioeconomic factors, 3 health disparity indicators, 6 climate change data, and 3 critical services gaps. You can also change when you're mapping this, the percentiles of what you're looking at. And so in this case, it's looking at the top 25%. Again, the top 25%, think of it as the higher score, the worse that community is in that ranking. So you really want to be in a lower ranking score, not a higher one. And so you can change this. And so right now it's looking at the top 25%, but you can change that to the top 5%, the top 50%. You can also change that to all the census tracts in the United States, or you can also just do the census tracts in your particular state. And so this map here is one example of the maps that you can generate. In this case, what we're looking at is on the slide bar here, we're looking at census tracts that have 9 or more out of the 12. In this case, it's these indicators here that ranked in the top 25% across the whole nation. And so, you know, these communities are in the top 25% and 9 out of these 12. And again, you can kind of see a high concentration along the communities along the San Diego Bay, in El Cajon, and along the international border, as well as up here in Escondido, a few communities along the 78. So those are state and federal tools that we have used. This next one is going to be a tool that is derived from the state, but is really done locally with the with us, the air district. And so back, I forget what the year was, but California Assembly Bill 2588 is called the California Air Toxics Hotspots Information and Assessment Act. And a lot of times this gets kind of abbreviated to just the Hotspots program. This assembly bill requires APCD, the local air district, to evaluate toxic air contaminant emissions from various stationary sources and to determine which facilities generate emissions that may present public health concerns. AB 2588 also requires facilities to report pollution emission information to the district. And we at the district quantify those emissions facilities emissions. APCD then prioritizes facilities, determine which facilities should produce a health risk assessment. So this is a modeling tool. The health risk assessment is a modeling tool that the district develops for each facility to estimate what is the potential risk to the surrounding communities from these facilities activities. And District Rule 1210 specifies the health risk limit that triggers a requirement that facilities notify nearby residents and or businesses that they are exposed to elevated health risks, and to develop and implement strategies to reduce their potential health risks. And more information can be found down here at this link down here. So if we look at a map of the facilities locations that are currently subject to this hotspots program, this is the map that we have. This map is available on the district's website. And these facilities are required to conduct a health risk assessment modeling. Please note that not all of these facilities exceed our current notification and emissions reduction limit, which is that limit is currently 10 in a million cancer risk cases. So if you were exposed to this emissions for 30 years, there's the estimate that 10 additional people out of 1 million would develop cancer. So residents living, working, playing, going to school near these facilities that are included in the hotspots program are potentially at a higher risk of being exposed to air contaminants than residents that are not near these facilities. One thing we should note is that the hotspots program does not evaluate cumulative risk, so total risk to residents from, say, multiple facilities in a close proximity. And so, you know, a cluster of hotspots facilities could potentially indicate that that neighborhood is at an increased neighborhood or increased risk than a neighborhood with only one hotspots facility in it. Another local tool that APCD produces relates to the the National Title V program. The Title V program is a federal program designed to standardize air quality permits and the permitting process for major sources of emission across the county. Title V only applies to major source facilities that meet specific criteria. And EPA defines a major source as a facility that emits or has the potential to emit any criteria pollutant or hazardous air pollutant at levels equal to or greater than the major source threshold. And that those thresholds are shown on this slide. They also have other facilities might also apply to or be required to be part of the Title V program if the facility is subject to certain federal requirements that require the facility to be part of this program regardless of their total emissions. So if we look at those locations, and these locations are shown in blue on this slide, again, these are facilities that have the potential to emit large quantities of hazardous pollutants, and therefore communities and residents that live and or are by these facilities are at a higher risk for higher air pollution. And so most of these facilities in San Diego are power plants, are landfills, and there's a few large manufacturers as well located in this. So that we take into account when we're looking at communities is the location of these facilities as well. Going on to the next one, this is a state program. This is called the California Healthy Places Index. This is the last tool that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about today. So the California Healthy Places Index summarizes the healthiness of a community conditions in California census tracts based on the distributions of 23 indicators of social determinants of health. The 23 indicators are grouped into 8 policy action domains, and these are listed here: economics, education, healthcare access, housing, neighborhood conditions, clean environment, social environment, and transportation. And again, more information can be found on the link on this slide. So if we look at the overall score for this, in this case, Healthy Places Index does that. If you are less healthy, you actually receive a lower score, whereas a lot of the other tools that we use, it's kind of the opposite. The higher score indicate less healthy places. But in this case, the less healthy places have a lower score, and those are shown in blue. The more healthy places are shown in green. And so the census tracts with the lower healthy place index score are at a health disadvantage compared to census tracts with the higher, a higher score. So the healthy place index definition of a health disadvantage is the inability of people to fulfill basic human needs required for full social participation and optimal health and well-being. So these needs include, but are not limited to, the needs for economic security, food, shelter, safety, transportation, education, social connection, and political participation. People who have a health disadvantage or more susceptible to air pollution. And so the map here is kind of just an overall score. Again, the areas in blue are less healthy than the areas in green. So if we take all together, and if we now determine that there is a community that needs additional monitoring based on these tools, how do we now decide what to measure? And this is a little bit different because in the regional tools, the tools themselves kind of land to which pollutant should be measured in that community. Whereas in this case, the tools indicate that these communities should have additional monitoring, but the tool and evaluation itself doesn't say you should measure for X or Y. And so once we pick a community, how do we determine, um, which equipment, which pollutants we should measure for? So in this case, APCD reaches out to residents in that community, as well as community organization, nonprofit organization, and other interested parties and stakeholders. We will hold a series of community meetings at a time and place or virtual platform that is most convenient for the community to hear about their air quality concerns. Um, After hearing those concerns, APCD will research different ways to measure the pollutants of concern and will present this information back to the community. A collaborative discussion will be held to determine which pollutants will be measured, um, and not only which ones to be measured, but where. We'll collaborate with the community on the monitoring locations. And an example of this collaborative process is the Community Air Protection Program, that the Portside community consists the communities which consist of the communities of Barrio Logan, Sherman Heights, Logan Heights, and West National City, as well as the international border communities consisting of San Ysidro and Otay Mesa. So we've established, those two communities. We reached out. We have actually monthly meetings with residents and other stakeholders from that areas to discuss, our monitoring efforts and ways to help reduce pollution in those communities. Okay. So this is the evaluation results. This is the last time we did that, utilizing all those tools, the Cal Environmental Screen, the disadvantaged community map from Senate Bill 535, the EJ screening tool, um, the proximities to facilities and the hot spots in the Title V programs, as well as the healthy place indices. APCD has ranked the various communities in San Diego. So the top 6 communities are shown in this map. The top 2 communities, currently have additional monitoring, and these communities are outlined, in blue with the green shading to them. The next 4 communities are outlined in red with a white shading. Um, and we are actively seeking additional funds to expand our community air, protection program into more communities. When we have those funds, we will probably go through the evaluation process again to reevaluate and re-rank the communities, again using the tools that we described in this presentation, to see which community we should reach out next. And so before we get to questions, I would also like to bring to everyone's attention that APCD has other reports on our monitoring networks. These include our annual air quality network report and our 5-year assessment reports on the regional ambient air monitoring network. And so that was the for the sites that we talked about in the very beginning. And for the community monitoring network, APCD has our AB 617 nomination submission plan, as well as our Portside Community Air Monitoring Plan, that's also on our website. And I would like to note that the International Border Community Air Monitoring Plan is currently in developed and should be, our goal is to have that completed and up on our website within the next, probably 6 to 12 months, preferably sooner than that, probably more like, our goal is really probably 4 to 6. And data collected from all this monitoring, is presented, in numerous places. A lot of that information is on on these 2, websites, the airnow.gov and the EPA.gov website. They have some very user-friendly ways to look at the data. We also present a lot of our data to the community, to the Portside and the international border community at our monthly meetings. And I would like to note that we do have some data on our website here. It's not as user-friendly as the AirNow and EPA website, but we are in the transition of making our data website, a lot more user-friendly. And lastly, I would like to thank everybody for their time today, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. If you have any questions after this meeting has concluded, you can contact either myself or Domingo or Melina at our website, or our email addresses on the slide. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, David. If anybody has any questions, if we could ask you to please use your hand raise feature on this webinar, just to make sure that we can get to you and allow you speaking privileges so that you can unmute and ask your question. Let's see. Also, we released this document for public comment, and you still have an opportunity to provide comments to us, like David said, via email, if you feel more comfortable doing it that way, or if you have any questions or comments come up after today's workshop. We are also offering a workshop later today at 5 p.m. If you think of anything, or if you would like to connect again with us at that time. And okay, and so I see a hand up from Jack. Jack, I'm going to unmute your, let's see, how to talk. Jack, can you work? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Domingo. Thank you, David. That's one of the better presentations I've seen in a long time. Just kind of nice, straightforward impacts to the communities, how they're all measured. Thank you very much for putting that together. And I think that it really helps people in different communities understand how the risk was identified, how their communities were identified. So I really just had one clarification I wanted to ask you about as far as the 10 in a million cancer risk. And it's kind of an important word, although and that is whether or not if the 10 in a million, the exposure, and I thought the appropriate word was that someone may develop cancer versus will develop cancer. Could you just clarify that for me?
No, it's definitely a may. There's no certain. I don't think that they're saying that it is an absolute certainty that it will happen. It's, I think, the potential to happen. So if I said will, I misspoke, and I should have said may, and I'll definitely make sure I keep that in mind for the next presentation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jack. I see that we received another question through our Q&A feature. This question says, will the presentation be posted somewhere after this meeting? I think we can certainly do that. We can make sure to post the presentation on our website for folks to review at their convenience. So we'll make sure to do that after this workshop. Thank you for that.
And it will also be on our YouTube channel, so you can rewatch this this presentation as well.
Thank you for that. That's a great point. Thanks, David. Any questions? Any other questions from anybody else? And so after we go through our open comment period, we'll review all the comments received and make any necessary revisions to the plan. And then we are going to be taking this plan to our board in our December 8th governing board meeting for their approval. So that's also another opportunity to express any comments or ask any questions you may have during that time.
You guys are letting me off easy today.
All right. again, we really thank all of you for your participation today. Please feel free to contact any of us if you have any thoughts, questions, comments that come up. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and close today's webinar. And again, thank you. If you want to join us again this afternoon, we have another webinar at 5 p.m. And we certainly look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.